Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Fenced In podcast, where we're bringing you training tips and guidance whilst in lockdown. This is episode 3, and we're talking about tactical analysis and how to maximize an opponent's weakness while minimizing their strengths. And you're here with me, Chris, a foil fencer from London in lockdown in Suffolk, and Ben. Ben, who are you?
I'm Ben. Welcome to the Fenced In podcast, everybody. So I just wanted to take this opportunity whilst we were doing the podcast today just to actually dedicate this particular episode to my very first fencing coach, Peter Whiteside, who sadly passed away 2 days ago from COVID-19. We are all struggling in lockdown, but ultimately this is a very real situation with everybody in this together, and we must remember ultimately this is a killer virus going around, and that it is taking lives from us, and it obviously has hit me quite personally, but Peter was an amazing part of my life and got me involved in the sport that I still enjoy to this very day, and for that I will be eternally grateful. By now you should probably know who we are and what we're about, but for those that are new, both Chris and I train to quite a high level, and we are also coach and student, and over the next few weeks we want to kind of bring to you guys, as Chris said, some kind of info about how to train during lockdown. And this is week 4 of lockdown, and last week we did an episode on psychology. It was safe to say Chris and I just had a conversation before this, and we're both excited to get out of the house for more than kind of half an hour at a time. But we do bring you today tactical analysis, which is a bit of a mouthful at the best of times. And we kind of wanted to talk about that because right now we have a lot of time, and when you've got a lot of time, you can do all the extras that go into being the kind of perfect model of an athlete, the methodology that really works. So with tactical analysis, this is a broad subject with many gains and but also some pitfalls. So Chris, what do you think about the whole idea of tactical analysis, and what do you think tactical analysis really is?
I was about to ask you that question.
Oh, really? Okay, well, you go first. You tell me what you think it is, and I'll give you mine.
So for me, tactical analysis is analyzing an opponent, a fight, what you're going to do, perhaps an approach, and what you might be trying to execute. So basically having a plan. I've often found in the UK, the fencing circuit is made up of the same people. So usually kind of when you go around fencing in the UK and the various competitions, I might do 10 in a year. I've usually fenced, most opponents more than once in the past. So, and you'll know each other. So you already have an idea of kind of who people are and what they do and what they like to do. I know that you don't do many UK competitions. You're so busy fencing abroad more often than not. So how does that relate? Do you think that's the same interpretation? What's tactical analysis for you?
Yeah, I agree. I think tactical analysis is potentially broad, but potentially quite specific as well. I think tactical analysis is the analysis of a fencing specific technique or tactics, or anything really. You can kind of break it right down. But for me, the idea of tactical analysis at, say, like elite level, world class level, is not only analyzing your opponents, but also analyzing yourself. So the idea of taking footage of oneself at competitions and reviewing it is hugely important. This has been done by many different sports for many different years, tennis, even golf, analyzing a swing, all that kind of stuff. But for fencing, I think a lot of people think it's analyzing, your opponent, which is absolutely correct and something that you can do. But also, we mustn't forget that we have ourselves to analyze as well, and where we may have made mistakes, or where we have made or gone to go and make changes, and actually they haven't been the correct one to do at the time, and you've effectively just given the athlete that you're competing against space to kind of make their actions and dominate the fight. So it has its pros and cons, tactical analysis, because I like to think of myself as quite a feeling based fencer. I like to really feel my way into the fights and kind of get a almost live feeling for what's going on in the fight and how to develop it from there. But at the same time, you don't have that play sometimes at the highest level, when you're fencing against some of the the world's ultra elite, you can't afford to ship 1 or 2 hits so early on in the fight to, to try and claw back,
Yeah, so I think that's quite interesting. And I've always thought I was more of a feeling-based fencer. But then at some point, I think it was after reading Winning Ugly, which is a tennis psychology book we mentioned in the last episode, that I found that having a system really helped me. And I've spoken to a few fencers who've also said that having a system really helped. And that system is really kind of knowing what your A game is and your strengths are and what sort of hits or moments you're trying to create. Have you found that? Is that sort of what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying. I've personally never found having like an A game or B game for whatever reason has helped me. I mean, so when we had the world class program, and there was a lot of analysis went into that, and actually, as I mentioned earlier on, we analysed ourselves, but analysed the opponent. But I actually there's a good phrase called paralysis through analysis, which is sometimes you analyse things so much that you lose the sense of feel and timing. You lose the idea of free play and letting things flow. So I think from my own point of view is I don't necessarily go onto the piece thinking, okay, well, if A doesn't work, I'm going to have B, and if B doesn't work, I'm going to have C, because the brain can only kind of manage so much at any one time. And so I kind of go into the fight with some loose ideas of what will work. So if you have an athlete that has a particularly good offense, then trying to go on the piece knowing that from on guard ready fence, you're going to try and be as offensive as you can to stop them from obviously playing their strengths. And so it's an area that has lots to gain from, but also a lot of problems, because I find that, and this is something that I sent over to you, Chris, which is the idea of what to do, not what not to do. And that's a bit of a mouthful itself, but I don't like going onto the piece going, okay, I must not let that fencer do this, because it automatically puts you in a negative mind space. It makes you very wary of what they're going to do to you, rather than you imposing your game upon them. And when we had the world class program, we had this like rule of 3, which was the idea of if somebody hasn't worked out a way to hit some within 3 points, if they haven't worked out an answer to a set of touches after 3 hits at world class level, it's most likely that athlete will lose the fight, because they've conceded 3 hits. This doesn't matter if it's 0-0 or if it's 6-3 or whatever, if it's 5-5 and then someone takes that lead. If there's been a string of 3 touches in a similar kind of action or motion, and the other athlete still hasn't had time to figure out that and make an appropriate change, usually that person will lose because they haven't been able to find a solution. And with such world-class athletes, that's a kind of lead that is insurmountable. Now, I say that there are lots of examples of people coming back from 10-5 down or 8-3 down or whatever, which kind of breaks that. But the idea in most fights, if you're able to hit someone 3 times with a similar theme and they haven't worked it out, providing you can stay ahead of the tactical changes that keep happening, you should come out on top. But I say this is a rule of thumb because this is something that was done from a very small pool of information. Not very small, quite a small pool of information, but it did ring true. And we did see it happen time and time again. So the idea of going on to a fight armed with some information, knowing that you may have to watch out for some things, but also wanting to impose your game, I think is hugely important. And I find the positivity of going out there going, this is what I'm going to do, not I should not let that person do this. Does that, you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I heard a psychologist say something along those lines. So around, positive thoughts is better than don't let this happen. Because if you say don't let this happen, what your brain interprets is let this happen.
Yeah.
So, if you say, okay, don't take a cease parry, what your brain or a large part of your brain interprets is take a cease parry, which is the opposite of what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, completely.
But I find the rule of 3 very interesting, actually, because it's so something that I've found some success with, and I'm just going to talk from personal experience. It's again having a system, because I've always found that I get quite overwhelmed with the idea of like the possibilities the number of things that you can do in fencing. You know, you can go this way, you can use this distance, you can take this line, you can engage the blade, you can not engage the blade, you can lunge, you can do different things, you can go offensive and defensive. And I've always found that to be quite just a whole world that I get completely lost in.
Yeah.
You know, if you think of those games that like on Xbox or anything where you have infinite possibilities to customize and change things, I often get so lost. But if you really narrow the number of possibilities, I do much better. And I found the same in fencing. I was like, right, okay, so this is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for this attack or this attack or this attack. In defense, I'm going to do one of these 2 or 3 things. And that gives me a much more limited pool to start from. And I'm able to analyze from there. If it works or doesn't work, it doesn't really matter. But I get an idea of what's going to work and what isn't going to work, or what's going to have a better feeling. And obviously, I don't fence as much as you do. So there's probably a lot to be said with the comfort of allowing yourself to have that time. But fences are also very different. And I think this also feeds into coaching advice that people do and don't give. And different fencers like different coaching advice. I like mine to be dumbed down. You know, people talking about, you know, in a fight or in the break saying, okay, do a half step, take this line, do a doubles engage and go. Doesn't work for me at all. I need something really simple like attack, defend, counter-attack, or kind of, you know, long attack, or, you know, kind of go blade first. That it needs to be that simple. I don't know what you find.
Yeah, no. I'm completely the same. I agree, and this is the problems that you have with this kind of analysis, because you're right. When you have a coach on the side of the piece, I'm the same as you. Simplicity is for me king. And there's been times when, you know, too much information can overload the brain, and when you're in a high stress situation like we spoke about last episode, you know, it's very hard to kind of digest all of that. So with any form of analysis, I like to start with myself. I like to look at what I did really well. So for example, if we take the last competition I was at in Cairo, we had a World Cup out there, and I took the videos and I had a look at them, and I was actually trying to look at what I did well. So because it's very easy to kind of be very self-critical when doing video analysis. And, you know, while we're all kind of got a lot more time on our hands, and, you know, we're not spending 3-4 hours in the fencing cell, we can go, okay, what else can we do to kind of learn more? And this understanding of sitting down and doing some analysis can feel quite long and laborious, but actually when you get into it, it can really be quite enjoyable. But it's always got to go back to simplicity. I think some people think the elite in any sport have very complex systems, when actually they don't. They just understand simplicity. There was a really good thing that one of my coaches said, Pavel said, and I can't remember exactly word for word, and he got this quote from somewhere else, but in times of high stress, you don't see athletes rise to a new game. They sink deeper into the habits that they have forged over many years. And that's a great way to explain that actually a person that understands their game really well, has got very good habits, they're able to, in the high stressful situations, deliver what are their strengths and their really good executions. And so I like to look at the analysis as looking at your strengths. What have you done really well? And enjoy it. Soak that up. Really go, yeah, that was great. That was really good. Because that gives you confidence in your game, because it's very easy to be self-critical. And then you can start to look for the things that you think, okay, well, that could be improved upon. But again, as you said, Chris, there's a whole remit of things that you would need to look for. Is it the blade actions? Is it the feet? Is it the timing? Is it distance? It could be so many different things. So it's almost like trying to look at the fight almost like a little bit like through blurred eyes slightly, which is, how does it look as an entirety? What are you happy with? What are you not happy with? And that's about you. That's looking at you. Okay, great. Well, that was a really good parry riposte. I really like that. And then as you start to build this picture of all the strengths that you've got, you start to see patterns. You start to see what you do right. And then you start to help highlight what you're not doing right. That's the way I start to look at it. And then when you have seen some weaknesses, things that you might do because of higher level stress situations, or because the other person's forcing you to do that, like a counter attack out of time or something like that, that's when you can go away and start training those. When you get to a very, very elite level where you're very comfortable with your skill set, you understand what your skills are, then you can start to really almost pinpoint certain things that you want to do against certain fencers. But I would also, and I sent these over to you in some notes, avoid the idea of pinpointing certain fencers at an elite level, because there's so many fences out there. The chances that you're going to get the same person twice is not is it's a rare occurrence. If you're someone that's consistently making top 16s in World Cups, then you will start to meet the same kind of people. But at the same time, you want to broaden and strengthen your game, not just pinpoint certain athletes. I mean, you spoke about the national circuit, but how have you found your development of analysis as you got older?
Understanding my own game has been really helpful, and I think not often enough do we film ourselves fencing at training as well. I said one of the most beneficial things I've done is just set up my phone on a small stand. I think the stand cost me £1 from Wilco or something. And I was really excited to use it. And I set it up at the end of the piece at awful angle, can't see a lot, but I can see how I'm fencing. And actually, my feet were much slower and sloppier than I thought they were. And that in itself is an incentive to kind of to move forward or push something else into it. I'd probably say at the moment, while we have a lack of fencing, it might be quite handy to film ourselves doing footwork on a target so that we, again, just to understand how we look. We've got loads of time now to understand ourselves better, and all of our usual reasons, which might still be applicable, which are around not having time, or you might turn up to training a bit late or just on time, and you say, right, I'm not giving myself the time to set up a camera or do anything to have a look. And you've got other people involved, they might not be happy to be filmed as well. Find that to be really helpful. And in terms of I found that throughout the years my understanding of my game has changed, and my understanding of fencing has changed as well. We spend a lot of time in general, not just you and I, in lessons being very technical, but there are also lots of moments in fencing that aren't very technical, that are just about getting the hit on. And Racing Bowden put something on Reddit the other week. He did a Q&A and said, ask me anything. And it spoke about two approaches to coaching. One is very technical and the other one is less technical, but more about putting the hit on and using that feeling.
Yeah, completely. And I think that idea of feeling is important, and a lot of people kind of really rely on that, and that's great. And well, actually, Johnny Davis, who the manager of the British team, he put it beautifully. He said, you've got to look at lessons and technical work as like doing your scales. In terms of like music, doing your scales. Fencing on the piste against another fencer is like free flowing jazz. It has some constructs, but ultimately you're just going to battle. And I think that's where this whole idea of the analysis needs to be used carefully. There's not only looking at yourself and what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong, or how you can develop better. Then you have the second layer of well, now I know my strengths, now I know my game, now I know what I like, what I dislike, and what I'm working on at training. Then you have a second layer, which is, okay, I videoed up myself a competition, I lost to this person. And I lost this person because of X, Y, and Z. So I'm going to carry away and start practicing that. And then there's a third level of analysis, which is kind of doing some analysis before you go on to the fight, knowing that you have a certain athlete. Now, when you know your strengths, you have to know how to implement them. And actually, it's not necessarily that you have to change your game overnight for these athletes. It's trying to work out how you will use your strength and when you will use your strength. And so looking at a video night before, if you have an athlete the next day, gives you a very good insight into what they're doing. But the minute you get on the piste, that might work for one hit. You might have spent, an hour in the evening doing a whole set of analysis on this person, and it might give you one hit. And then everything else goes out the window because they're at such a elite level, they suddenly change their game entirely. And so this is where people have to understand how analysis works. First of all, when you analyze yourself, get understood with what you are good at. Then start analyzing how you lost certain fights and how you can stop that from happening in the future. And then when you're at a level where you will know who you're going to get in certain fights and you do analysis on that opponent, again, be aware that this only will give you an advantage of 1, 2, possibly 3 hits. But after that, it's kind of battle royale. Everything will change. And so this idea of there's lots of constructs and doing loads of analysis will suddenly make you world champion. It just gives you a little bit more information, but it is not the complete picture.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting. And I imagine at your level, who regularly makes 64s at World Cups, there is more footage available of your opponent once you get to that stage, or possibly even the stage before, because the 64s are a very tough field. It's not the same 64 fencers that are often there. I'm probably right in saying a pool of 128.
Yeah.
So that there is footage of some kind, but as you say, so presumably that only helps you so much. And so over the last few years, you made a big jump. You kind of went from making a few 64s to consistently making 64s very regularly. And in that time, you've become Commonwealth champion, individual as well. And you've had Commonwealth medals by team as well. Did you change something in your approach to matches or tactical analysis in that time to kind of make that jump or kind of move on to another stage?
I think to be honest, it's a hard one to pinpoint one particular thing that's done it for me. I look at this as continuous development, and I think there are many factors. I think, like I spoke about last week with psychology, but the idea of watching myself back and really getting honest feedback from myself about where I was good, where I wasn't so good. I found for a while I did overanalyze opponents or overanalyze myself to the point where you kind of lose the wood from the trees, and you do have to be a little bit more based on feel. I think that I also experience counts for a lot, and I think that when you've been doing it as long as we have, you start to build up subconscious understandings of certain styles, certain types of fencer that you come across. I mean, the great thing is that I would say that if we sat here now, we could probably pick the world's top 50, and you could give me one or two things that those people do that are very unique to them. And I think this is the other thing that comes into coaching is people say, oh, well, what makes a great fencer? Well, it's how long's a piece of string? But you look at the top fencers in the world, and they're all very, very good at fencing, but they've all got something very unique about them.
And I think definitely something that adds into that is you going into an A grade, who's going to win? And it could be anyone from the top 50. And I think somebody that's really accentuated that in the last couple of seasons is Maxime Pouty from France, who came out of nowhere really to win his first title. I don't know if he's won another one since, but he's definitely come second since. And that was insane. And you're like, oh, right, okay. I mean, anyone can do it.
And I think that is a great example of someone that then starts to really understand their game. When you watch him fence now, he knows his strengths. He knows how to implement his game. And so the idea of, and I've had the pleasure of fencing Maxine a couple of times actually. And he's exceptionally physically strong, but he knows his game and he imposes that. And actually, it's really hard to stop him from imposing his game on you. And so you have to be, imposing your game. And so these are the kind of things where when you actually watch a fight back, for example, it might not be that you did anything wrong. They were just absolutely brilliant at doing what they were doing. And the idea of fencing being a mathematical equation where you always have to find an answer to what they're doing. For example, you speak about Putty, and he has this amazing broken time fletch. And it's world class. Why would you try and stop that? Why would you try and look for a solution in real time? Don't allow him the runway to be able to do that. And this is what analysis is about. It's about understanding that you're not going to have an answer for everything, but you can shut things down by using your strength, imposing your game upon people. And that's why people, first of all, we're talking about this 3-tier system of learning yourself best and understanding yourself best. Then you know what you can rely on, what you can use, what you can impose. And then as you get better and better, you can start to see how you lost certain fights. Was it that actually you just ran out of steam? Was it that you saw mentally, you start to crumble a little bit, you start to get stressed and reverting back to silly things you used to do? Or is it that actually you lost for an entirely different other reason, which is they were just very, very good at what they were doing, and you were just being passive and allowing them to kind of do their world-class actions? And so then the idea of that next layer of analysis and going, right, well, this is what they do, and I'm going to make sure that from on Garbury fence, they don't have that chance to make the press with absence of blade. So it's the understanding of what they do. That might only work for 1 or 2 touches, but it doesn't mean that lead isn't enough to give you the confidence and the flow to find other actions.
And do you find that that's often related to distance? When I speak to people, when people ask me, people kind of a bit further down in the UK rankings, kind of around 50, 70, 100, 150, they want to know about certain things that are really tactical. And more often than not, what I come back to is talking about distance and say, look, you're losing that hit because I'm imposing my distance and just plonking it on and scoring a light. You think you're in control when you're attacking, but you're still sitting in my area of distance. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, yeah, I think so. I think it is the whole idea of men's foil at the moment has gone through very much absence of blade, this kind of marching attack that we speak about. But this is the other great thing that's good about analysis, and actually leads me on to the next point, whilst kind of maintaining what you're saying, which is the idea that right now people in lockdown might not have footage on themselves. There'll be people sitting there that go, oh, I've never taken any video footage of myself. I haven't got a clue. Fine, it doesn't matter. It's okay. You can go on YouTube and you can find all manner of fights from the world stage. And actually, from national championships in the UK, everything is out there, which means you can sit there and you can analyze the fights. You can do it very subjectively because it's not you. So you start to understand what kind of fashions are being used in fencing. So this idea of this kind of strong marching attack, absence of blade, imposing the distance upon someone, and you often see the person that kind of gives ground at the moment, kind of really kind of allows that person to dominate the distance, is usually the one that gets hit. But with that being said, the idea of looking at this analysis and looking at the fences gives you a really good idea of how the referees are calling things. Because right now, we have seen that fencing, when Danny Garozzo won the Olympic Games in 2016, this strong marching attack, absence of blade, very late finishes, drawing people into these counterattacks because they weren't able to find the blade or set up any form of parry riposte. So it went from this to then actually the referees started to tighten up on the idea of the marching attack. So a lot more preparations are being given now. Many more stops in the footwork phrasing are being given now. And you can see that change literally by watching snippets of clips over the ages of fencing. And this is the other bit of armory that this gives you, is that right now, if you've been finding your results not as strong as you want and you're struggling to find the flow of fencing, sit down and watch how many videos about how the sport has almost changed and developed over the last 4 years to get to, well, what was going to be the Olympic Games now, but you get an understanding of how things are changing.
Yeah, definitely. And the marching attack was given with much more prominence than it was, and nobody really knew what to do about it. I mean, high domestic level, it's a hard thing because what ends up happening is it trickles down. People see it working with international athletes and they kind of copy it. And then, domestic refereeing can be tricky sometimes. People don't always give what, is considered to be the right thing, especially if you're exposed to the higher level. So they give stuff that doesn't work. But something I've found really helpful that you've really helped me work on is the idea of absorbing the attack, kind of opening the distance much more. So kind of let somebody march a bit and then just threaten. And, because it's all like bluff on bluff, isn't it? Until it's make somebody blink and then you make an opportunity in a moment to kind of do something. So if you can do that, then you can kind of take over, or you can push a bit, and then it makes it much easier to go back to fencing with feeling. It's almost like kind of taking away someone's system to put in feeling, and then you're kind of back at a neutral point.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that idea of that we try and vary different kind of defensive actions based on this marching attack, and that can be keeping the distance very close to extending that distance. But one of the things that kind of was seen recently at the World Championships, when my teammate Marcus got a silver medal at the World Champs with an incredible display of high class technical fencing. One of the things that we suddenly saw come back almost overnight that was displayed by Marcus was line. And everyone was suddenly doing line. And actually, if you watch Marcus's route all the way to the final, he must hit with at least 2 or 3 lines every single fight. And suddenly, the line has come back. Everyone's using this again. Everyone's using it as a way to deter the marching attack. And they're being given. And this is great to see. And, I remember watching the Olympic Games on YouTube from Athens many years ago. And Brice Guillot was doing these incredible broken time flaches, these incredible long distance flaches, and that was something he was using every day. He really felt it that day. It became a strength of his. And so the idea of sitting down now while we've got all this time and actually understanding, arming yourself with new information. If you can do analysis on yourself, awesome, that's great. Find out what you're good at, and then you can start to look at how you lose fights or how you win fights for that matter. And then as you get better, you can start to look how you pinpoint certain athletes that you may draw in the future if you're going to get them at certain competitions. And finally, look at videos of how the referees are giving things, how they're making the decisions, how those decisions are changing, and how you can stay ahead of the curve. And also look at things, fashions of hits that are starting to be used that can either work in favor of one touch or another. There's so much out there, and we've got so much time now. Go into the new season with more knowledge on yourself and more knowledge of fencing, but the fashions of fencing, and then you can be really dangerous.
Yeah, and just going to go back to line quickly. I love line. Line's a great thing. When you get it, you feel on top of the world. When you're hit with it, you feel like a real dumbass.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it requires a lot of technical work to get it right. But again, it's something people can be practicing when they come out of here. And there's so much video footage out there. Go and do it. Sit on the sofa tonight and watch hours of fencing.
So on refereeing calls, tactical analysis, Alex Lim, the Canadian fencer, who's also based in London at my club at South Boston, has built a web page or a web app that goes to YouTube, gets clips,
Yeah,
and brings them back. And they're clips that are only a few seconds long. They're clips of a hit in a fencing bout. And he's got the rest of the page set up to ask the person that's watching them, what hit is this? How hard did you find this call? Was it hit to the left, hit to the right, parry, riposte, attack? Were there any cards involved? To test people's understanding of certain actions and refereeing calls. And most of these calls have been validated by FIU referees as well. So you're not going into something random. You're getting something back from it, and it could be quite a useful tool. I found it quite interesting, very fascinating.
I think things like that are great, and a lot more of that is coming about now. And they're great tools. Absolutely. That's something that I think that a lot of fencers should be, because the more data it collects, the more we'll understand, the more we'll know. But we've all been on the receiving end of bad calls and good calls for that matter. But understanding the kind of fashions of fencing and understanding the way things are being given through those kind of apps, or just watching it yourself is great. And this is the wonderful thing about fencing, is because it's subjective, it's always a good debate.
There's a lot going on. It can be quite, as I said, I can often relate to it being quite a minefield, but I quite like dumbing it down and keeping it simple. I find that really works for me. So hopefully, not hopefully, but maybe some people relate to that as well.
I'm the same. Simplicity is king. I'm on board with you that way.
Simplicity is king. That's a great phrase.
But I think that kind of draws us quite nicely to a bit of a conclusion, and I think that tactical analysis is don't get paralysis through analysis. Don't overthink it. Find a way to make it work for you. That's the most important thing. I hope you'll have found that helpful. I know a lot of people have been sending in messages to both Chris and I about what they would like to hear. We're thinking for episode 4 that actually this could translate quite nicely into technical training, and alongside that's obviously blade and footwork. So the next one will be on technical training and footwork. That's something we want to go for, Chris.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's, as you said, a lot of talk about tactical analysis, and then translating that into what people can do at home, and useful drills or exercises or approaches to technical training and footwork would be really good. And so if there's anything specific that anybody wants to hear about, then maybe get in touch, and we'll make sure to include that.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we mentioned before, you can get in contact with us in many different ways. If you know Chris or I personally, drop us a message or an email. I think if you follow me on Instagram, I'm Ben Peggs, and on Facebook I have my Ben Peggs fencing page. So you're more than welcome to drop us something there. We also have the Fenced In Podcast Twitter account, which you can message us on. Please, guys, leave reviews on any of the platforms that we're on, whether that be Spotify or Google Podcast or Apple Podcasts, and is it Transistor, the other one we're on as well? We're on everything. So
we're on everything, every podcast platform. Anyway, you can get your podcasts, you'll find us.
That's it, guys, and stay tuned for episode 4 next week.
Thanks for listening. See you then.
Bye.